Welcome back to the Good Growth Podcast, brought to you by BGF, the most active equity investor in the UK and Ireland. We're kicking off Series 2 with Joe Jani, CEO and founder of Metric Search, and non-executive chair Andy McRae. Joe takes us through starting Metric during the pandemic, navigating the recruitment gold rush of 2021, scaling in the US, and achieving 30% year-on-year growth. Tune in to hear how BGF's introduction to Andy with 30 years of industry experience has been a game changer, helping Metric build strong governance, scalable processes, and a solid foundation for long-term success.
Joe, Andy, welcome to the BGF Good Growth Podcast. Where did the name Metric Search come from?
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for having us. So the Metric Search name came in New York when we launched the business, and initially we set out to be a data-driven executive search business. However, we launched September 2019, and shortly after that followed a pandemic, and the data-driven slightly took a back seat.
And talk to us about how you launched in New York.
Yeah, so I was over in New York working for another business as their general manager, and an opportunity arose to launch our own business out in New York, which was great. So it was almost a no-brainer for me to launch Metric at that time. I was only 26, but I had a good network of clients, had a good team. So the US market, the opportunity was too good to turn down. So we went ahead and did it at 26 in 2019.
And what did you start? Which sector did you specialise in?
Yeah, so we started off in life sciences, and a niche of that, which is pharmaceuticals.
And what were the sort of adjacent markets that you ended up kind of moving into?
So subsequently since then, we've launched two brands. So we have a bio brand, which is life science, medtech, health tech, anything healthcare or pharmaceutical related. And we also have another brand, Metric Geo, which is renewables, infrastructure, engineering.
And so fast forward 5 years, you take a deal from BGF, which is pretty extraordinary in lots of ways, that a company that was started in the States by somebody in their 20s ends up taking this private equity investment. And Andy, when we spoke before, you made the point that 0.01% of recruitment firms end up taking private equity money. Where did you guys meet, and what was that story?
Yeah. Andy, do you want to...
Well, I'll kick off first. I mean, recruitment's an incestuous world. I'd been aware of Metric through having worked in the industry for 30 years. I'm part of the BGF talent network. And I guess when Joe and the team were both wooing with a number of investors, including BGF said, Andy, we think there's a business that might be of interest to you. Can you help us look at it? Joe had also heard of me. And so it was a bit of an alignment of the stars. So we met, hit it off straight away. And I made the point, the 0.1% that you refer to, I made the point to the BGF team that I think this was the 1 in a million opportunity that was really worth having their best shot at. When Joe and I met, there were things about him, about the business, that really resonated with me, and it was a no-brainer. So when I was being interviewed, and I was formally interviewed by Joe and his colleagues, I was delighted when I was given the opportunity.
Well, we can talk about what it's like interviewing somebody so many years with more experience in a moment. But what was it that stood out first for you, Andy? What was it about Joe and Metric that made it that 1 in a million?
I mean, there's a whole range of things, but where Metric is different, in many recruitment businesses, good recruiters, people that bill a lot, make a lot of money by way of commission, put their hand up, I want to be a manager, and then become a manager. They're not very good at it, and they no longer bill. The model of Metric that Joe has built is that do as I do, not do as I say. So all of the senior team, including Joe, continue to bill fees and are amongst the top billers. That makes it much, much easier when people join knowing nothing, very often first jobbers, that can actually see what good looks like. And recruitment is a simple business, but if you can have leaders that actually lead by way of example, and for me that resonated so much. Joe just described it very eloquently, and it was real and it was tangible.
And what did you make of Andy when you first met him?
Yeah, and Andy was brilliant, and as soon as we met him, we knew he was the perfect chair for us. What Andy hasn't told you there is when BGF aligned me and Andy to meet, they said, Andy's not available, he's got no time, he's probably not going to want to be chairman, but you should go and meet him anyway. So we did, and we got on really well. Shared view of recruitment, shared love of sports, and in true recruitment style, I did try and close him in the room, which BGF found quite funny. But pleased to say Andy did accept, even though he told us he wasn't available.
I mean, that is actually true. I mean, I'm semi-retired, and I did say to BGF, look, absolutely be delighted to help you out, which I did. But I said, look, just managing your expectations, I don't really want another role.
Yeah.
And he did exactly as he said. But I was thrilled, really.
And what drew you to the BGF Talent Network then, Andy?
On a number of things. The fact that BGF have an approach to investments where they deliberately take a minority shareholding and back fast-growing entrepreneurial businesses. Very often, it is when somebody is looking to take external investment for the first time, driven maybe by personal de-risking reasons. And I've been involved with BGF now for 9 years.
Yeah.
And what drew me to them was the fact that they listened to what I was interested in. Others don't necessarily. And they invest in businesses where I can make a difference. And as your non-exec chair, I want to work with people I like. I like BGF. I want to work with people I like in the company. And if I can make a difference, to me, those are my three criteria. And BGF offer that.
And what do BGF bring as far as you're concerned, Joe? I mean, you've been able to take money off the table as well, which for somebody in their sort of late 20s, early 30s is must be a sort of life-changing moment that kind of then de-risks you and allows you to really focus on growing the business. So I'd be interested in your reflections on that. But also, what else does BGF bring apart from the finance side?
Yeah, BGF have already added a ton of value to Metric. Andy clearly is a huge part of that, and the talent network has been brilliant. I can't speak highly enough of that. What I would say has been impactful personally to me is it's great to have people in the boardroom who also care about Metric and care about the shared growth.
Yeah.
It's, as a young entrepreneur, it's quite a lonely journey until you take private equity investment and all of a sudden there's Adam, there's Andy, and there's regular board meetings with everyone who has a shared vision. So I think me having support around me of people more experienced and to be honest, more intelligent than me has been massively helpful.
And what are you looking for then when you're interviewing somebody that's kind of 20 years your senior, etc.? Like, how does that
and the rest of
yeah,
it.
right. That's just what I was trying to be kind. But what are you kind of like looking for at that stage? Because you spend all your day kind of like recruiting, etc. So I'm just interested in how that alters.
Yeah, I guess I'm quite used to interviewing people, right? But interviewing for the chair specifically was probably our most important task. And there's a lot of people in Andy's world and in the recruitment industry who offer similar services to Andy, but with absolutely nowhere near the track record. So I think track record is imperative. And if I look at the businesses Andy also chairs or has chaired, they are also in that 0.01% who've gone on to have real success. So I think genuine M&A experience, genuine success working for a private equity-based company, but then there's also the soft skills, which I think Andy was incredible at. He's very humble, he's very down to earth for someone who's achieved so much in the industry, and again, is always a sounding board for me and supportive rather than someone saying, this is how we did this 30 years ago, follow this playbook, this is what worked for me. Because, and again, Andy won't mind me saying, that recruitment is ever evolving. So I think Andy balances that perfectly.
What has evolved about recruitment then? Because I'm sure that'll be interesting for a lot of people. Like, it's what all businesses have to do all of the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, recruitment is and recruiters don't like it, is a simple business. You know, it's working for a client that have themselves been unable to find the talent they're looking for, and it's finding gainful future employment for a candidate. So you've probably got three customers. You've got the paying client and you've got the candidate that wants a job. That hasn't changed over the years, but what has happened is that people know what they expect as a candidate or a client. And the industry, as I'm afraid, is littered with rogues who will ghost you. So you're their best friend as a candidate while they're putting forward a shortlist. If you're not selected, you get no feedback. You're ghosted. You're no longer a friend. But then 5 years later, you might be back on, and then they wonder why they say, I'm never going to work with that recruitment firm. There has been, I think, a quantum shift in service expectation from both the client, who's looking for the best talent that we can't find. Interestingly, one of the other things that happened is technology plays an increasing role now in recruitment, and will continue to do so. Buzzword AI. But when LinkedIn came in, people said it's going to be the death knell of recruitment. It actually never was, because internal talent teams at the large pharmaceutical companies, renewable energy companies themselves use LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But what they don't know is they don't have access to people who either don't have a very active LinkedIn profile or who don't even have a LinkedIn profile. That's where recruitment businesses come in. So technology has a role. We use LinkedIn. But what's really changed is the importance of service quality, regular feedback, honesty, saying to candidates, look, we put your CV forward, they were not interested for the following reasons. Our advice would be, if you can just work on this area, then you'll have a better, and we'd love to stay in touch with you.
Yeah.
What that means is that when you've got another opportunity, you know a candidate that may not have been right for that role that's right now. So it's a simple industry, but there's been a massive, massive shift, because we charge people a lot of money to take away a problem that they have, which is, I've got this business critical role, and most of the roles we place are business critical. And so we justify our fees because we deliver the best service. And my earlier comment, Jimmy, around the guys at Metric, the senior managers, all continuing to bill, is because they've got great client relationships, they've got great candidate networks. Why would you walk away from that?
Yeah.
It has changed, but just from a service expectation.
It's probably worth me adding to that. I think that's been driven by competition. There's 34,000 recruitment agencies in the UK, right? Most of them don't make it past 10 people. It's very easy to set up a recruitment agency. It's very hard to scale one, and it's very hard to continue to scale one with quality. And I think that's how we've been able to be successful is delivering business critical talent quickly and with quality.
How have you been able to do that in 5 years? Because it's very easy to say those things that you just said, but how have you been able to do it where so many don't?
Yeah, great question. And just to touch on something Andy said earlier, a lot of our workforce is made up of Gen Z and millennials, right? And any study shows what they like to see is management leading from the front, people doing the same work they're doing, not doing as they're doing, not do as you're told almost. So our L&D structure is world class, but everyone has good L&D. Ours has been coupled with leadership who are in the trenches with them, doing the same work, coaching, developing them. So I think that's how we've been able to scale it so quickly, is by having that really good L&D model and having processes in place.
What's in the learning and development model that makes it so special?
Yeah, really good question. The key focus for us is business development.
Yeah.
So in 2021, when the market was the recruitment gold rush, everyone did well, everyone had their best years, it was very easy to win a new client because everyone was hiring and it was a real war for talent. 2022, when that started to dry up, it was critical that you were good at business development. And when we talk about business development, that is ultimately going out and signing a new client to do their recruitment for them. So we have done so many sessions on business development, but it's not just our L&D manager delivering that. It's people who've got 10, 15 years, who've been top performers, going out and doing that training. There's an online platform which is accessible for anyone at any time. So we've really invested heavily in that function, which has been key for us.
I'll just add one thing, if I may, Jimmy, that every recruitment business will claim they've got an L&D function, and they probably have one person that touches on it. The difference at Metric, which was one of the things that really attracted me, is they do it, but they have data to support that the L&D they've done has meant that somebody has pulled a new client, has got a new job to fill.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I was very keen on was that the business was very data driven, very data focused. It helps scale the business because if we do this, you can see the immediate output. The L&D initiatives, and what we do around BD, others do, but we do it better. It's repeated. They've got managers who live what L&D is about, but there's data that proves and can support, is it working? And if it's not, then we can increase the support that we're giving somebody. But there's a real cause and effect between that L&D that Metric provide and the reason that they're growing by 30% per annum.
Yeah, and I really like about how you sort of pulled us back right to the start there, Andy, in terms of like you did set out for it to be literally the name, right? Data and metrics, and so on. But talk to us about the journey over the last 4 years, because it's been a pretty crazy time to be kind of building a business in that period, right? We've had pandemics, lockdowns, coming back and forth, etc. Like, tell us about the sort of growth journey during it.
Yeah, it's been an interesting five and a bit years to start a business, right, with everything you've mentioned. So I was actually out in New York when we launched the business. So being out there was key, and 95% of our revenue comes from the US. So I think me being out there for the first 3 years was really critical to us having good relationships in the US. But to your question of it being up and down in a turbulent time, COVID was very much the start of the business, and we talk a lot about this as surviving that first year of COVID in New York was really impressive, and it took a lot of work, and that was a real me leading from the front and having to do a lot of work to keep the lights on almost, and since then the market's improved for the year of 21-22 that we talk about, and that gave us a bit of a boost. But I think that turbulent time was really formative for us, and we talk a lot about that internally of, look, if we can get through that first 12 months in New York where 75% of startups fail, we've had a startup in New York in the pandemic. If you can make it through that, you can make it through anything.
And I mean, just adding a little bit of data to support that, most recruitment businesses in 2020 at the height of lockdowns really struggled. And results went backwards.
Yeah.
Quoted companies, privately owned, small, medium and large. Every recruitment business in the world had a fantastic 21 as markets started to open up. Post-pandemic, people started rehiring. That continued into 2022, but then flattened off. And most recruitment businesses have found that they've gone backwards throughout 23 and into 24. Other than Metric, which in their 5.5 years of existence has grown by 30% per annum. And that was one of the criteria when I signed an NDA and looked at some of the data. I thought, wow.
Yeah.
And all of these bits we touched on, the L&D, the model, the markets that they chose to go into. Good recruitment businesses know what they want to be famous for. Average recruitment businesses do a bit of this and a bit of that. These guys were geo and bio, very, very focused. So you can see that I make this decision, this is what happens. But I think it's important just saying that the markets, it was great to survive the pandemic, but this business has continued to grow when others have withered.
And for me, those last 2 years have been the most impressive for me, and I feel most proud of those last 2 years where the industry on average has gone back 17% and we've grown 30% year on year. I take more from that than the year where we doubled in size in 21 because everyone did well. So So those last 2 years where it's been really tough for us to still grow and go through the process and take investment from BGF, that's what I've been most proud of. And all of the points Andy makes are correct, but there's also a really clear blueprint for success that we have at Metric, which when people join, they can't believe how simple we make this job. It is a very simple job, but we have a blueprint for success. And if you follow that, it's very scalable. And that's how we've got to 95 people in 5 years is just a real clear blueprint for success of if you do X, Y, Z, you will go on to be successful.
And what do you want to be famous for?
We want to be famous for being a world-class company to work with for clients and colleagues. And I want to be known for delivering business-critical, game-changing talent into our clients at a reasonable price. And I think that's important to say. We want to deliver talent fast, but at a fair cost. I don't think people love paying recruitment fees, right? I think it's important for us that our clients get value and want to come back and work with us.
What are the differences between running kind of recruitment in the US and UK?
Yeah, a lot, right?
Because talk to us about your footprint a little bit in the US as well, right?
Yeah, so New York, first office, and then since then we've expanded into Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and Austin, Texas. We will open California 2025 in San Diego. So good US footprint. Huge differences, right? 95% of our revenue comes from the US market. We actually do very little recruitment into the UK market. The US market accounts for 38% of the overall direct hire staffing market. So it's important we're out there.
Yeah.
But for us, in terms of being in the US, that is absolutely key. And me moving out there and living out there was really important for me, understanding what American clients and candidates want.
Yeah. What do you think, Andy, are the differences between them?
They're night and day in my mind. I think as a recruitment business, without getting too flippant, Europe is becoming more and more regulated. Time to hire, cost of hire gets ever more difficult. Whereas, of course, in the US, most people are on a 2-week notice period. Yeah. So the churn in industry means that it's a more attractive environment. It is, yes, it's regulated, but nowhere near what the UK and continental Europe is like. Salaries are higher. Yeah. There are 340 million people in the US. The population's a proxy for market size and opportunity. For me, I probably wouldn't have taken this role if the business didn't have its US footprint, because it's the fastest growing English-speaking staffing market in the world. We don't need that market to grow. We've just got to continue to take more market share from our competitors. But to answer your question more directly, the actual process is the same, other than the expectations of clients and candidates is very different from one market to another.
Yeah, another key difference for me is I think Americans are used to using a middleman, right? So when they sell their homes, they have their real estate person, they have their family doctor, they have their go-to lawyer. They almost have us as their go-to talent partner, right? I think they're more used to using a middleman to solve a problem. In the UK, we are less likely to do that, and we almost begrudge that a little more than the Americans. I think they are fine to go, look, this is Joe, he looks after our talent, Metric Bio do this for us, Metric Geo do this, and as long as you give them a good service, they are fine with that.
What questions do you ask, Joe, to try and understand a business and its culture in that sense?
Yeah, I think the big question for us is tell us about the problem. What is the problem you're facing? Because it can vary, right? All of our roles are business critical. So we want to know what the problem we're solving is first. And that might be a quality director in an FDA regulated company. It might be a chief commercial officer who's obviously going to be driving sales. So it's key to understand what the problem is first. Then secondary, you want to know the culture of the business, right? The best way to do that is to speak to the CEO, speak to the founders, and understand what's going to be a real culture fit for them. Generally, you'll find quite similar themes in both markets.
But how do you understand the company's culture? Because I suppose that's a huge part of the kind of recruitment business, right? Like what questions have you found? And you've done it in your 20s, and I think that's really remarkable sometimes
Yeah.
to kind of like have that understanding of, a life sciences founder, chief executive, probably in their 40s, trying to grow. That's quite a leap that you're kind of having to make there. So I'm really intrigued as to how you've been able to do that.
So I guess in terms of questions, we would ask to understand culture. So tell me about your best employee. What makes them so good? What type of person have you hired who's been successful in the past?
Yeah.
But generally, you need to go and meet them, right? And we spend a lot of time at conferences. Where we were out at one in San Diego last year. We had 250 meetings in 3 days, right? It was intense, but you get a feel from the culture by meeting these people and asking what they need, what their good hires have done, what's a bad hire look like, what hasn't worked.
I think also adding to that, Joe, that good recruiters are great networkers with really well established interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
We also are subject matter experts, and very often CEOs, head of product will be actually milking us for information to help build, and actually in that dialogue, they'll be saying, what are you seeing some of our competitors doing?
Yeah.
That then opens up a conversation where you're then able to ask questions. But so I think because we have recruitment consultants who know the market in which they work brilliantly, they are subject matter experts in their own niche, whether that's in geo or bio, that just builds a confidence, and you find that many of the people, of those 250, they'll be milking us for information. Their market position, how competitive are they? Why have they struggled to hire people? Well, because you're paying $50,000 less than your competitors are.
Yeah, and it's important to add that all of our staff are in real micro niches, right? So CDMO is a sector where we met 250 people, which isn't a huge market.
You're going to have to explain CDMO.
Yeah, so it's contract development manufacturing organisations. So the big pharma companies will outsource their manufacturing work to CDMOs, right? So that's a micro niche in itself, and then we'll go even deeper. So we'll have someone who does just business development roles for CDMOs, someone who just does manufacturing roles for CDMOs. So by the time we talk to these clients, we kind of already know their problems and we already know what they're going to be looking for. So generally with a CDMO, their problems for hiring will be they're in fairly remote locations, so they'll have to relocate someone. But also it's a margin business, CDMO, so they won't want someone who's coming from big pharma who is used to having $1 billion budget. They'll want someone who's used to being a little bit more dynamic and a bit more frugal and a bit more hands-on. So that's the type of knowledge all of our consultants would have down to a micro niche level, and that would be the same across all of our verticals.
And talk to us about, this is the BGF Good Growth podcast, right? You've had some, crazy growth over the last few years. Has there ever been a time when you felt like it's almost going too quickly?
I think the year of 21, which I've talked about a lot, I wouldn't say it was going too fast because we were enjoying it and it was a great time, but I was very conscious that was a false economy. But I was really cautious not to get too carried away with ourselves during that period of time, and I was hammering home the basics and the fundamentals and make sure people knew that this wasn't going to last forever, and making sure we were continuing to upskill our staff so that they would be able to navigate a trickier market as we've seen in the last 2 years. So I think this year is growing incredibly quickly for us, but I'd never say it's going too fast yet. But there has been periods where maybe you need to just make sure that the staff are still demonstrating the right behaviours.
And so that's keeping a focus on the fundamentals then, and sort of like, almost hammering the tent poles down as the sort of wind picks up.
Yeah, and back to Andy's point, it's all about quality, right? And quality of service to the client and candidate. And it can be easy for people to miss that when they've got loads of work on or the market's getting a little easier. So it was important for us that we delivered good quality to all our clients and all our candidates, even when we had a lot of work on or when the market was a little easier. So I think that's important, and we did a good job of that.
I was just going to add that I think good recruitment businesses, Jimmy, that are looking to scale into a geography that's 5, eventually 8 hours behind the UK, you need institutionalised processes so that people move around the world, which is one of the attractions of joining Metric. start their career in Nottingham and then maybe one day end up in San Diego. It's quite an exciting. But what we want them to know is that actually when they leave Nottingham having been really successful, they can land in San Diego and on day one continue. And that's often tedious. Oh God, institutionalized. So in other words, the way you do it is the same the world over. That allows us to maintain the same service quality, and that what good looks like is the same the world over. And I think that what Joe and the team did during those good years was not lose sight of those basics. In recruitment, it's a simple industry, but what gets done, what gets measured gets done, what gets done gets rewarded. It's often overlooked, but we also want to make it easy for people to do their job. If they're finding, oh God, I need to hire somebody, there's no one helping me hire people and train and develop. So they have got institutionalised processes. And I bang on and on about that now in board meetings.
And BGF have really helped take that to another level. So we had good processes in place, but BGF coming in have helped us get great processes in place. And the growth share pool created helped us get a new layer of management bought into putting these processes in place and actually understanding why they need to do them, because recruitment's not typically something where people love process.
Yeah.
So that's been a big plus of BGF.
And how have they done that?
In what sense?
Well, what's the sort of practicality? So thinking people that are listening to this podcast might be thinking of taking BGF money or aspiring to at some stage. I guess it'd be interesting just to hear about how the relationship actually sort of works once you've taken the money, right?
It's by showing you the end goal, right? And it's, if you have these processes, this is what you're going to need for your next management presentations. This is what a future buyer might look like. This is what they're going to want to see. And I would say that's been a combination of BGF and Andy, who's been through this many times, but making it clear why we have the processes and what the value of them is, and making sure I can communicate that to the management team. I think just mapping that out very clearly, because they know what the next buyer wants.
A future buyer, one of their areas of diligence will be around, is this business well run? Do they have good governance? Because the bigger you get, the more important that governance framework matters. And so what I've done and what BGF do is just to say, we need to ensure that if we were selling today, nobody's going to say that's an area of a red flag. So it's basic stuff, but BGF and me saying, this is what good looks like. You are maybe 70% of the way. So we're on a journey to get to 100% in all of these good governance things.
Metrics.
Metrics. Absolutely. I didn't even know the story.
What are your favourite questions to ask and be asked in interviews?
I'm going to go to Andy on that one first.
Let's go hold of a chair.
And actually, it's quite interesting because in Metric and in other BGF businesses where I'm chair, if we are hiring someone to the board, I will often lead that process. So I often will be meeting, whether it's for a CFO role or a CCO role. These tend to be really successful people that are quite polished. I like to ask questions where people cannot rehearse for them. So I will say, so if part of the job spec is, good team player, I'll ask a question along the lines of, give me an example where your view was the one that prevailed, but where actually the start point was the rest of the board disagreed with you completely. What was it about what you did that made others embrace, and with hindsight, was it the right thing to force through? That's the type of question I ask, because what it does do is they have to answer with a specific competency-based response. In some cases, I've found people 5 minutes later have not actually asked the question, and I've said, you've not given me an example, you've not asked the question. And in a couple of cases, they've qualified themselves out. So I like to ask questions that build upon, we've all agreed a profile, ask questions that force them to give specific examples of their experience.
Yeah.
And then it opens up a much more rounded discussion rather than, what's your favourite football team?
Yeah.
Too many interviews go down that route and then they wonder why very often they fail.
Yeah.
So that would be. Has that given you enough time?
Yeah, no. That's what the cheer's for, is to throw him under the bus when the time's right. Now, I think my favourite question to ask is what annoys you and what are you not going to like doing? I think you always get a really authentic answer from that, and that is a good one to get a real insight into the person. Andy actually asked me that not too long ago, which I thought was interesting. So that's my favourite question to ask is what annoys you and what do you not like doing? And I think that favourite question to be asked is quite a simple one, is why Metric? Whether that is why should we work with you or why should we invest in you? Because I think there's such a body of work and there's so much we can speak to that. So quite a nice open question where you can talk about the business.
How long was the process as well?
It wasn't 90 days. I think everyone's told me it was actually pretty fast. This was my first private equity.
Yeah.
I think it was probably about 7-8 months.
Okay.
I laugh because I've done many of these transactions, both going in and exiting, and the advisors will all say, "Oh, it'll take 4 months beginning to end," and I say to entrepreneurs, double it. I don't think I've done a deal that's ever come in the time that BGF and their equivalents say, and the advisors managing the process say.
Yeah.
And I'd love to find a way to crack that code because I'd be a zillionaire.
Yeah, everyone told me I will get deal fatigue, but I will actually say I don't feel I did get any deal fatigue with it. I think the process it took 6-7 months, but it wasn't overly stressful.
Yeah.
I think part of that was you were clear on what good looked like for you as a person.
Yeah.
So people talk about de-risking. That's important, means different things. But I think you were, and maybe because you knew someone in the industry, it makes it a lot easier to not get deal fatigue because you can understand what's going on and why it's happening.
Yeah.
And you were very clear. Your feedback sometimes can be quite blunt, but I think for advisors going through a process, that's quite important.
Yeah, no, it was a good process. I think there's probably one other area to touch on in terms of how they've had the credibility to say, because yes, with hiring people, but also we can now go to our clients who are 9 times out of 10 PE or VC backed and say, yeah, same, we understand it. And again, we touched on the pain points earlier. If they're hiring a new CFO, we know what a PE-backed CFO looks like. So again, it adds credibility with that they're working with a proper company who've been through the same processes as them, not just someone in their bedroom.
Absolutely. Andy, Joe, thanks so much for coming on the BGF Good Growth podcast.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to the Good Growth podcast. If you enjoyed that, make sure to hit subscribe so you're the first to hear about new episodes. And always stay up to date on the latest growth insights.